Hi, I'm Frankie, and in this video, I'm going to share with you how Azure API Management versioning works and how you can use it. This series is based on the Azure API Management hands-on lab. If you want to follow along or do it on your own, you can find a link to it in the description. Versioning in Azure API Management is a way to present new or upgraded APIs in a safe and distinct way. When you use versioning in Azure API Management, you can have multiple versions of the same API with different types of breaking changes. You can specify how API consumers access those versions through different methods, like query parameters, headers, or the path. And you can create custom naming conventions that help administrators distinguish versions in the Azure portal and your developers distinguish your versions in the developer portal. Versioning is not to be confused with revisions. When I worked at Microsoft and spoke with customers about Azure API Management, this was a common mistake that many people made. Versioning is for when you introduce breaking changes. And API consumers can choose when to adopt your new versions using your specified versioning scheme. Let's introduce versioning to one of our APIs. I'll go over to the APIs page. Let's add versioning to the Star Wars API. I'll hit the three dots and I'll create a new version. This is where I can name my new version and I can decide on my versioning scheme for this API going forward. I'll call this new version v2. I can use a header or query string or a path as my versioning scheme, and I'll choose to use path. My /v2 is what will be appended to the end of the API in order to show an API consumer that they're using another version. My API version name will be the Star Wars -v2, and I'll add each of these products to this new version. And I'll create the new version now. Coming down, I can now see with this Star Wars API that I have a dropdown for this API, and I have the original version listed and the new v2 version I just created. Even though the original version is listed as original, that name is purely semantic and for organizational purposes. It doesn't change the way the API was working before versions were introduced. If I go to test this now using the v2 version, I can see that the endpoint that's being called has v2 after my suffix for this API. In the developer portal, as a logged in user, I can see these two versions for the Star Wars APIs, with the distinguishing factor being the v2 naming convention that I created for this new version. If I click into this, I can also see this additional dropdown that helps me select which type of version I want to use for my Star Wars API. And if I give this a try, I can see that the version that I'll be using is the v2 version here as well. This should help you get started with the versioning in Azure API Management. If this video was helpful for you, please like it and subscribe to this channel for more content like this. And if you missed any of the past Azure API Management videos I've put together, you can find some of those here. Thank you so much. I'll see you in the next one.